Hi, everyone. Good morning. How are you doing? Lots of distractions here, and me wearing glass is probably not helping the distractions. Let me just take a quick picture of you. There we go. And I shared it with everyone, so wherever I go online, you'll be able to see yourselves. So today I'm here hopefully to inspire you. I know that there's lots of campuseros that are hoping to start their own companies or found a startup. Raise your hand if you're thinking about being in a startup, starting a startup, or if you're already working with a startup. Okay, great, lots of you. So what I'd like to share with you today is the principles of innovation that keep Google at the edge of innovation, but also how we implement them at campus, not campus party, Campus London, Google's campus. When I wrote that I'm going to campus party this morning, people asked me like, what, you're having a party and you didn't tell us? So this is the other campus. I think when we talk about innovation, it's important to look at the big picture. And this chart tells an interesting story. Look at the rate of tech adoption from print, which was pretty stable, not that many innovations. The big innovation was the creation of print, but then nothing really changed for a few hundred years, to TV. When TV came, it was a big innovation, and then there were black and white TVs, and they were really expensive, and little by little, there was this vision of a TV in every home, and you started having color TV, and then flat screen TVs, and then all the way to smart TVs today. You see that the increase in technology and the rate of technology adoption was much higher. And then we look at the internet, it's even much steeper, from broadband internet to wireless internet to mobile internet. And if we were talking about smartphones and tablets, I don't think that you would even have that angle. It would pretty much be a straight line, and it wouldn't be an evolution. It's really a revolution of information. So if you ever want to be in the technology business, you have to be ahead of this curve at every step of the game, and that's why innovation is important. But it's also important to mention that innovation is not perfection. It's an iterative process. When you want to be innovative, it doesn't mean that you have to come up with the perfect solution from day one and craft it in your living room and expect to have the most amazing result. That rarely happens. Innovation is a lot of iteration. It's trying to scratch the right problem and thinking about solutions that will get you closer. So today we're going to talk about the 8 principles of innovation at Google. This is something that was proposed by Susan Wojcicki, who's the VP of ads at Google. And Google literally started in her garage, in her physical garage at her home. So she knows a thing or two about the company. So first, when we talk about innovation, I think it all starts with a vision. Do you recognize the guys in the picture? Yeah? What's their name? Okay, Sergey and Larry, well done. They're the founders of Google, and this is where they started, in Susan's garage. And when they started, they didn't have the product that you see as Google today. They had a vision, and their vision was to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible. So when it comes to vision, and when it comes to the big picture, what I would say is whatever your vision is, make it matter. Work on something that's meaningful not only to you, but meaningful to the world. So when we're brainstorming startup ideas with our friend and we're thinking about the next cool app or an interesting game, it's totally fine. But in the back of your head, keep thinking about this vision and what you're doing to make the world a better place. At campus, we have a pretty big vision and mission. Usually when I describe campus, I say that if there was an equivalent between real estate and software, campus would be an open source building. It's like an operating system for startups where we help startups in the early stage grow. And our mission is let's fill this town with startups. Of course, I'd love to fill this continent with startups, but we have to start somewhere. And I'm really excited to already seeing the results of having this physical space and community and what it does to the density of network in London. So I mentioned, if campus is the operating system, and imagine that campus is like a mobile operating system, like Android. Wouldn't it be boring if all the apps on Android would be only Google apps? So I think it would. And that's why we've partnered with great partners to power this ecosystem. We work with Tech Hub, Central Working, Seed Camp, Startup Weekend that you saw Dev on stage. Hey, say hi to Startup Weekend Europe right here. A bunch of accelerators, Codec, to essentially power this 7-story building filled with startups. We're based next to Silicon Roundabout, and we have 7 stories filled with startups, which in every level of campus, there's something else going on. We'll talk a little bit more about that as I progress in the presentation. I think the best way to introduce campus is to show you a brief video, so hopefully the sound works, and we'll take a look at that. Oops, sorry.
Google for Entrepreneurs support programs all around the world, and Campus is one of them. It's a 7-story building in East London that has over 100 startups based in it. We call Campus an open source building, where Google, working with partners and the startup community, are powering the startup ecosystem in East London. We provide entrepreneurs with space, with a community, and with mentorship opportunities. This is the Campus Cafe, where entrepreneurs can come and work and find someone to network with.
It's aggregating all of those.
Andy and I met at campus. We started working on CPD review. Last week we launched, and now we've got what is the biggest dental course directory in the UK.
It does make a big difference when you are a startup to be surrounded by lots of other startups.
We are a Friends of Friends matchmaking app.
It's an online collaboration platform for university students.
It's a flat share and room share search engine. A social network for swimmers.
Hundreds of startups and entrepreneurs pass through Campus either to work from the cafe for free or rent a desk.
I've rented a desk on a monthly basis. I'm sure it's dedicated to me. I provide my computer. Campus provides the network and the facilities. Campus is great. There's a lot of cross-pollination of technical knowledge and business knowledge, and it's also just a good buzz, a good vibe.
I'm chief designer and co-founder of AgCreative, which is a bamboo smartphone company. I love innovation, that's what it's all about. Campus, it's only been here like a couple of months, and it seems to be kind of the center of where everything's happening.
Entrepreneurship is really part of the DNA of Google. We're providing startups with the ecosystem and the environment for them to grow.
It does make a big difference when you are a startup to be surrounded by lots of other startups.
I would never have had the chance to meet people who are developers, who are designers.
It helps me discover other ideas which I may not have done if I was in an office.
Having an environment like this, you have specialists in each field, you get to know people. So many introductions are made every day, and this really wouldn't have happened without Google Campus.
There isn't anywhere else where you can do this.
So I hope that that gave you a flavor of what Campus is and why it's important to have a vision as well of what you're doing. Moving on to the next principle, we're talking about focusing on the user. This is the homepage of Google in 1998. Sorry, I don't know if you're hearing this beep the same way that I do. There we go. This is the homepage of Google in 1998, and back then, the company didn't have a business model. So people were telling them, can we pay you to change the results so our link shows up before other people's links in the organic results? And Larry and Sergey said no, because they believe that it's more important to focus on the user and to give the user what they need and the relevancy rather than changing the results or changing your product for some other ulterior motives. So focusing on the user is extremely important, and it manifests itself in pretty much everything that Google does in every product. This is a cool little example of a feature and how it demonstrates how Google thinks about the user, even in the little details. So that's just an example, right? Google has many users of many different types, and it's important to think about them when you're creating your products. At Campus, we also think about our users in the form of a community. And this is a picture of the message board in campus. And you see that it looks a little bit chaotic. We empty the message board every 2 weeks, and 24 hours later, it looks like this again. So everything that we do at campus is focused on helping startups grow, start and grow. We'll talk more about it as we progress, but if I could give you a pro tip, if you're thinking about creating a startup, joining a startup, or something like that, even if you don't live in London and you don't have a campus next to you, be active in your local startup community. You know, it may mean going to events, organizing your own events, inviting a speaker to talk to other entrepreneurs, even meeting entrepreneurs for coffee, and you'll be surprised at what magic you can create. So focusing on the user, very important. How do we help startups at campus? How do we focus on the user? Well, we asked startups what they think is the best contribution of campus, and they said that they come to campus mostly because it helps them get things done. And what do I mean by that? One, we have a program called Campus EDU, which is essentially a mentoring and educational platform where every week Googlers come to campus to mentor startups one-on-one. We also have inspirational speakers, people like Guy Kawasaki, Jimmy Wales, Eric Schmidt, who come and speak with the startups once a month, and we record all these sessions and make them available on YouTube. So as a startup, you're able to ask a thought leader in your industry, what do they think about the industry or the problem that you're trying to solve? And finally, we have classes partnering with universities, corporate partners, and bigger startups that can help educate you on important topics. The other thing we do is help them raise their profile. So this is a video taken in the Campus Cam, which is a physical, with my accent it sounds like I said campus scam, but it's campus camera. And it's a physical booth that enables any entrepreneur or member of campus to record a short video of themselves to introduce themselves to the community. We already have hundreds of these videos, and you can see the diversity of the people trying to solve real problems at campus. And finally, I mentioned these mentorship opportunities. So to give you a little bit of a flavor, in the last 7 months of 2012, we had 250 startups receive mentoring from Googlers. Every week, it's on a different topic, and it happens every Friday consistently, so you know to expect it. So when people ask me, like, how many mentorship sessions do you expect this year? I said, I don't know, let's double it. Let's call it 500. And as of last week, we're already at like 690, so getting closer to 1,000. What I'm trying to give you by this is that it's very important to find your users and to understand what are their needs and how you can support them. I'm giving you the example of Google and campus, but when you're thinking about your own startups, you have to think in this way, about what your users need and not necessarily what you want to provide. The next principle is one of my favorites because I think it's one that talks about courage. And the principle is think big and start small. So I'm going to best illustrate this principle with an example. When Google started with Maps, with Google Maps, Google Maps weren't what they are today. Google Maps in the beginning were really simple, and they were really expensive to do. So Google said, if our mission is organizing the world's information and make it universally accessible, wouldn't it be great if people could also find physical locations, and they could also find directions to the places they need? So they started with a basic Google Maps product. Of course, it wasn't perfect, and it was very far from where we have today, but they started with helping people find what they were looking for also in Maps. Google Maps slowly became driving directions. Driving directions slowly became walking directions and cycling directions. And then came Street View. And Street View suddenly started showing you where you can physically go and in what store corner do you have to turn to get to your destination. And today we have self-driving cars. I'm not sure that Larry and Sergey knew that they were going to enter self-driving car space when they started with Google Maps, but it all starts with a vision, and it all starts with a small step. So when you're talking about your own startup, think about what's the next smallest step that you can take that will get you closer to fulfilling your idea. Do you need to talk to customers? Do you need to launch a minimum viable product? Do you need to have all these features, or can you just settle for the core of your idea? So I'm not going to show you the video of self-driving cars, but if you've never seen one, this is sort of what they look like. It's like a Prius with a thing on its roof. And it's pretty amazing. There's so much technology packed into it. I just tell you that they've done test drives on Highway number 1 going from San Francisco to LA. And if you ever, whoever went to this road, Highway number 1? All right, so the guys that have been there, girls, you know that it's a really windy road with lots of turns. And in this particular case, the car only had one accident. When it was parked on the side, a car bumped on it in the back. So I think that it's safe to say that it's working and it's coming. When it comes to campus and startups, this is how we implement the think big, start small. I believe that it's really important to start with a minimum viable product. And what do I mean by that? For example, take this donut tells the story better than I can ever explain. A minimum viable product is the donut. It's the product. It's the core idea that I've been thinking about. And then the product, or the non-minimum viable product, it's the one with all the little candy and sprinkles on top. So I'll give you an example of a startup at campus and how they implemented it. The startup is called Branded, and they were wanting to create a marketplace, a subscription service for men to shop for clothes online. If you're a man, you know that we don't really like shopping, in majority of us, and when we do, we would prefer to just be done with it all at once. So rather than going and creating, storage infrastructure and creating databases to match clothes individually to people, they started with a minimum viable product. They started with a landing page that said, wouldn't it be great if there was a service that sent you a package of clothes that fit you exactly once a month? The landing page had a button that said subscribe, but that button didn't even work. That's how minimum the minimum viable product was. So the definition of a minimum viable product needs to be something that you're almost ashamed to launch because it's so minimal, but it proves your point. And then they measured how many people clicked on this button, how many people put their name or email address and said, I want this service. And when they realized that a large percentage of their users, or at least according to the metric that they set as a goal, a lot of the users really wanted it, then they went and developed the functionality of the button, then they went and developed the functionality of the packages, but in the beginning, they didn't waste lots of time and money into creating something that no one really asked for. One book that I can recommend on this topic is by Peter Sims, and it's called Little Bets. And I think this summarizes at least my approach, and in many cases, Google's approach to innovation. You have to start from a little bet. If you went to your company or to your co-founders and you said, we need $1 million to create the company that will compete with Amazon and win in e-commerce, it's going to be very tough. There's not going to be too many people to support you because it's a monumental ask. But if you said, why don't we launch an e-commerce store that does something different, that does something that no one else has and sells only one product? And why don't we launch it only in this market and maybe focus on women? Maybe it works. If it doesn't work, you have to change. And that change is called pivot. And I'll talk a little bit about pivot and failure in a bit. The next principle is something that I'm sure that you guys agree with, and that's open will win. Do you recognize the blue logo on the right? What is it? It's not Chrome? Chromium. Well done. 5 points. Chromium is the open source version of Chrome, where you can take the operating system, you can take the browser, and you can modify it and contribute to it. It's an open source project. Android is an open source project. So anyone can take Android and create their own version, local version, etc. And there's plenty of startups that do. And we believe as a company that open will win. Of course, at campus, we implement it because everything that we do is open. I mentioned that we're an open source. This is a picture of the cafe at campus. And it's representative because it's always full. So the cafe at campus, powered by our partner Central Working, is a free space for entrepreneurs. So any one of you that wanted to work from campus for free can simply go right now to campuslondon.com, sign up, and we'll give you a little card when you get to campus, and you can work from the cafe for free. That's how open we are. And there's more than 18,000 people that have already done so. Of course, startups understand the importance of openness as well. Do you recognize any of these logos? Yeah, just shout if you recognize the logo. Yeah? Okay, Drupal, We have, what else? Firefox, what else? Okay, great. So these are open source platforms like Joomla, Drupal, Firefox, etc., which enable you to take a platform and not start from scratch. Of course, this helps you get to market faster. In the past, maybe if you wanted to create, let's say, a network of content sites that talk about cycling, you would have to go and develop each and every component. You would have to think about how people are going to share articles. How do you do comments? How do you create a new profile for a writer? Today, you can simply take one of these platforms and you're in business in 5 minutes. And not only that, cloud infrastructure also means that you don't need to buy expensive servers and pay a lot of money to address a global audience. So open will win, and open is helping a lot of startups get to market much faster. The next principle is kind of related to openness, but it has to do with ideas. How many of you heard the expression like, oh, ideas are a dime a dozen, execution is what matters? Right, a lot of you. So I beg to differ, and I think that ideas are not necessarily a dime a dozen. I'm not saying that execution isn't important. Execution is extremely important, but getting ideas and being open to where these ideas come from is crucial. This is an actual picture from a whiteboard at Google. It's an actual picture. And this is very typical at Google. Engineers would go and post a problem on a whiteboard on a Tuesday, and then they would go back to the whiteboard on a Thursday, and they would see that someone else solved the problem for them. Okay, this is a mentality that anyone is going to be able to contribute an idea. And there's other tools and things that Google does, and I'll share a personal story related to it. This is a platform that we have internally. I don't think many people have seen this screenshot before. It's an ideas platform where anyone can go and suggest an idea. So my background is product management. I used to have every title before and after product manager for different .com companies. But when I joined Google, I joined in a different capacity. But guess what? You can't just turn off the product manager in you. So every week, I used to go and submit an idea to this platform. And these ideas got picked up, and I now have 3 patents on my name because someone recognized that this is a good idea and we should do something about it. I'm not a product manager anymore, but the company recognized that ideas can come from anywhere. So think about your own organization, your own startups. Where do ideas come from? Do they all have to come from the CEO? Do you listen to your interns? Do you listen to the other partners or to competitors or to feedback from customers? Ideas can really come from everywhere, and it's a mentality, something that you need to change. These are just pictures of posters of competitions that we run internally at Google for developers to come up with ideas. So of course, this can be encouraged. We treat it almost like a festivity. It's almost like a party where we celebrate these ideas. If you have an idea, even though it's not your job, and you came up with an amazing product, we can still do something about it, and you can get recognized, and we can take it to the next level. And this is where 20% time comes in. How many of you heard of 20% time? I'm making you work out your arm this morning. Good. All right, so this is a funny Dilbert caricature because I think it captures the gist. In most cases, I'm just going to bust a myth. It's 120% time. We have a 100% job, and then people take another 20% passion project and contribute something that is within their area of expertise, but maybe not in the function that they were hired to do. So as an example, at campus, I used to do a lot on my own. And you know what? It was OK because I wanted to learn and I wanted to prove that I can do it, but it's not scalable. Eventually, I would burn out. And besides, I don't have all the ideas. So I recruited 20%ers from Google to help me scale different products and programs at campus. So we talked about office hours. There's a 20%er that their job is to help with office hours. When I wanted to do a survey at campus, I didn't go and craft a survey myself. I had a 20%er from the research team that their whole job at Google is to craft surveys. So this is not something that's specific to Google. I know that many companies are looking at innovation and how they can apply this 20% concept. So when you're thinking about your own startup, again, think about how you can leverage the passion of people and let them work on something that's maybe not exactly what they were hired to do, but something that they're perfectly capable of doing. And to prove that this is not just a waste of time, these are just some of the products that were born out of 20% time. I don't know if you knew this. Gmail was a 20% project. Google News was a 20% project. Google Scholar, Google Alerts, Google Sky, and many other projects started as a 20% project and became what they are today. Well, we talked about ideas, we talked about innovation, we talked about openness, but now I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about failure. Failure is a little bit of a dirty word in Europe. For the Americans, and I used to live in San Francisco and New York before I moved to London, if you failed and you go and raise money, you're a serial entrepreneur. Actually, there's a higher likelihood that someone will invest in you because you already learned, you already made the mistakes, you already learned the hard learnings. So what I preach, and one of the principles of innovations at Google, is that failure is good. And this is an example of the evolution of social. And I'm not implying, by the way, that Google Plus is a failure. But to get to Google Plus, we had some learning experiences along the way. We started in 2007 with Open Social. The idea was, shouldn't all social services contribute their data to like a big API, and then people will be able to find this content when they search? Again, organizing the world's information, make it universally accessible. Well, guess what? That didn't work because not everybody wanted to contribute their information. There was this closed garden problem. 2009, we launched Google Wave, and we said, like, wow, so there's all this social content. Wouldn't it be cool to participate in the different social networks from one platform? You could have chat, you could have something like a social network where you post stuff, you can post pictures, Picasa, but guess what? It didn't work. It was too complicated for my mom to use, for example. In 2010, we said, let's take the best of both worlds and create something called Buzz. How many of you remember Buzz? Some of you. Buzz didn't succeed. They made a massive mess up. I don't want to curse. With the launch, and suddenly you were following everyone in your contacts automatically. So husbands were following ex-wives, disgruntled employees were following their bosses. It was a mess. All of this failure was great. Why? Because when Google got around to launching Google+, they took all of these learnings into the DNA of the company. So even in big companies, failure is good, and it's really good, especially in startups. We need to celebrate failure. Startups also fail all the time. We just don't have to call it failure, we call it pivot. I mentioned earlier that we talk about pivot. How many of you are familiar with the lean startup methodology? All right, many of you. If you're not, I highly recommend that you read the book Lean Startup. Borrow it, go to your local library. You don't necessarily have to buy it, but this summarizes it. Lean Startup basically says that most products didn't fail because they failed to develop a product. They failed because they failed to develop their market. So you have to learn, you have to build, and then you have to measure. Don't build something that no one wants and then figure out why people aren't using it. A lot of companies went through this process, and when it doesn't work, that's when you have to pivot. So these are just a few examples of web failures. Did you know that Groupon started as a social activism platform? They wanted to get people to sign petitions and to be more active in society and fight for causes. When that didn't work, they said, well, what if we apply the same concept to commerce? And you saw what happened afterwards. Twitter started as an SMS company. And they figured, what if people could send short messages to each other? Well, they failed with that. And look at what happened. So failure isn't a bad thing. And the art is actually knowing how to make this pivot. And it can be a pivot on your market. It can be a pivot on your business model. It can be a pivot on the customer that you address. So highly recommend reading Lean Startup and pivoting and learning more about this. The next principle has to do with a mentality. It has to do with fostering entrepreneurship. So people at Google, they were hired as engineers, as product managers, etc. So how do we foster entrepreneurship? We foster entrepreneurship because it's in our culture. It's in the DNA of the company. Google started by two founders in the garage. They were entrepreneurs. They created something new, and they want everyone in the company to have the same mentality as if it's their own company. Startups, of course, foster entrepreneurship in different ways, and they are entrepreneurs, so everyone in the startup has this feeling that we're up against the world and we need to solve big problems and make progress. But the best advice that I have for you, if you don't have experience in a startup, go to a hackathon. Go to a startup weekend. Taste what it's like to be in a startup. Taste what it's like to be in a cross-functional team that has someone that can code, someone that can design, someone that can do marketing. And this will give you this entrepreneurship mentality. The goal of Startup Weekend isn't to create billion-dollar companies. When it happens, it's great and we should celebrate it, but the goal is this entrepreneurship mentality. And a high percentage of people, Deb, correct me if I'm wrong, actually go and join a startup within a year of doing a Startup Weekend. So if you're thinking about what's the smallest step, talking of small bets, what's the smallest step you can do to join a startup or to become an entrepreneur? Go to a hackathon. We're getting close to the end. Google fosters entrepreneurship in many ways, but you probably heard about Google X. Google X is the innovation lab at Google that created these, that created the self-driving cars, that's working on Project Loon, that's sending balloons 20 kilometers up in the sky to give people Wi-Fi in remote areas. And this is another way of fostering entrepreneurship. Google is innovative as a whole, but there is a team that's in charge of thinking about the next thing, about the future, about the next problems to solve, and it's something that people aspire to do. I thought that just to give you a flavor of what this next thing could be and what the device that I'm wearing could be used for, I'll show you a little video.
Okay, Glass, record a video.
This is it. We're on in 2 minutes.
Okay, Glass. Hang out with the Flying Club.
Google photos of tiger heads.
You ready? You ready? Right there. Okay, Glass. Take a picture.
Stay delicious inside.
Arroy.
Arrow.
Google jellyfish.
If this doesn't make you want to be an entrepreneur, I don't know what does. But when we talk about fostering entrepreneurship, this is not just inspiring Googlers, it's inspiring other developers and people to think about the possibilities, to try to solve problems, to take a risk. We're almost done. We have 2 principles to go, and then I want to leave you with a thought. So this one is very connected to what we talked about, but it's about launching early. This is also summarizing a little bit of the lean startup. Launching early means that you don't need to have a perfect product before you launch your product to the market. You recognize that a lot of these logos have a beta next to them. all of the Google products launch in beta. We never expect to have a final product when we launch. It's an iterative process. So you have to launch, you have to listen to your customers, you have to see how they use the product, and then you have to change very, very quickly. Someone told me that it's called duckling or ducking, that on the surface, when you look at a duck on the river or in the lake, they look really calm. But underneath, they're paddling very, very fast. So your product needs to look very, very calm on the surface, but underneath, you need to paddle very, very fast. How many of you are familiar with the business model canvas? OK, great. So this is one of the ways where you can launch early and iterate. Using this tool, started by Alexander Osterwalder, anyone can test their business models and see 50 different variations of their startup before they commit a lot of resources of time and money. So one of the ways to launching early and iterating is playing with this business model canvas and understanding what are the different value propositions that my startup can have. Who are my customers? How am I going to charge money? Who are my potential partners? What's the key value here? I don't have time to get into too many examples, but this is a fascinating tool, and I recommend that you look for Business Model Canvas on YouTube to find out more. So we can talk about campus and launching early and iterating without mentioning some of the startups. These are all startups that are launching early and iterating. And it's not fair that I'm only going to mention a few, because there's over 100 startups at campus, and all of them do amazing things. But I'll just give you a flavor. This is a company called Just Add Zero. You've seen the guy in the video. They create a mobile phone touchscreen made of bamboo, using Android as the operating system. This is a company called Treaty. It's a sitcom company. And what they do is a 360 review or 360 questionnaire based on your social graph. So essentially what it does is it tells your friends and family to tell you exactly what they think about you, which is a scary thought. This is a company called AdBrain, and they do multi-screen advertising, essentially understanding that you are one user, even if you're using a tablet, a mobile, or a laptop. So maybe they can give you better ads rather than having a hit or miss with different platforms. They just raised $1 million in seed. And this company is called Say Duck. They essentially let you shop for furniture in an app using augmented reality. So let's say if I wanted to change the sofa over here and buy a new sofa, typically what I would have to do is go to IKEA, for example, and then look at the different sofas they have on display and try to imagine how would it look on this stage and bring the measurements with me. With this app, I can just point the phone at the stage and change the entire IKEA catalog on my phone, change the color, change the fabric, change the angle without ever having to leave the stage, and I could buy it through the app as well. And this company I like because it's called ITs, and I like them because of how ambitious they are with such a small team. What they want to do is put Wi-Fi on all London black cabs, and the way that they're going to pay for it is by having this screen on top of the cab on the roof that gives you geolocated advertising. So this gives you a flavor. These are all companies that are launching early and iterating. They haven't figured it out yet, but they have a minimum viable product, and they have a hell of a lot of ambition to go and find their market. And finally, the last principle of innovation is think about everything as a platform. So be a platform, float all boats. A lot of what Google does, you would recognize, is a platform. For example, when we launched Maps, I mentioned it was very expensive. We didn't have the final product. We didn't have an API. So essentially, if you wanted to use Google Maps, you have to go to maps.google.com. But we found that this startup in San Francisco called Housing Maps, they needed maps for their site. They needed to show users where the house that they are going to buy or rent, where it's located. So they used to save or cache images of Google Maps. For every house that they had, they used to go and look at it at Google Maps, save the image, and put it on their website. When the product managers of Google Maps saw this, the instinct maybe would have been, let's send them a letter from the lawyer saying that you can't do this, and have them take it down, because the only way to use Google Maps is by going to Google Maps. But rather than doing that, they created an API that enabled any developer or any startup to take Google Maps and use it for their product. No money exchanged, no questions asked. Today, more than 50% of the Google Maps traffic comes from third parties. So this is the benefit of being a platform. You not only are depending on your own people for innovation, suddenly you're leveraging, you're crowdsourcing innovation from the entire universe of startups. A lot of what we do is platforms. You may recognize this is the Chrome store. This is the Google Play platform. And today, the number of apps on Google Play is just going bonkers because it enables others to contribute to this platform and create their own products. Enables them to monetize their products, enables other people to get feedback on their innovation. So that's why platforms are actually very powerful. And my tip to you is think about your product as a platform. How can you incorporate the innovation of others? Campus, of course, is a platform. This is all of the things that we do to help startups. It's open source. Anyone can book an event at campus. Anyone can sign up. Anyone can come for an idea at campus. We want to hear people's ideas. We encourage dialogue. And this is how we implement this principle. So to finish off, I'll just give you a few stats on campus so you know what we're up to. We have 10 partners at campus. We helped over 1,000 startups in year one. I think actually that number is way too low compared to the reality. We held 868 events in year one that brought more than 60,000 people to campus. That's pretty much what the British Library gets a year. So it's not bad for an office for startup that only exists for a year and some change. We have over 18,000 members registered to work from the cafe. And in year one, this is an interesting one, the cafe at campus sold more than 90,000 cups of coffee, which is a lot of coffee. But I think that there's a correlation between coffee and innovation, and we have pretty damn good coffee. So we talked about the principles of innovation at Google. We talked about how we implement them at campus. And I wanted to give you also a few tips on how you can think about these principles when it relates to your startup or your future startup. But before I go, I want to leave you with a thought. And this is about creating purple cows. So this story came from Seth Godin, who's a marketing author. Some call him a marketing guru. And he tells a story of him driving in the Swiss countryside. And the first time that he was driving for a while, and after a while of seeing just mountains and grass, for the first time he saw a cow. And it was a brown cow, and he was like, oh, interesting, there's a cow. And then he saw another brown cow, and another brown cow, and another brown cow. And after seeing a few brown cows, he basically stopped noticing them, and he continued to focus on the road. But suddenly, he came across this purple cow that looked like a Milka commercial. And he's like, oh my God, this is a purple cow. He stopped the car, he got out of the car, he took pictures of it, sent it to all his friends, tweeted, put it on Google+, Facebook. He was thinking like, this is amazing, I should put purple cows on t-shirts, I should tell the world about this. And I think you can already understand the analogy. Don't be normal, create purple cows. Thank you very much. I think we have time for a few questions. Ask me anything.
With this so amazing example in London, when Google Campus is going to spread around Europe, let's talk about Europe.
Let's talk about Europe. If it was up to me, I would love to have 50 campuses. But the reality is that campus is a new thing for Google. And I think we need to recognize that it's also one of the most amazing Europe-first examples. Because if you think about Google, we usually try things out in the US. You know, glass is an example. Self-driving cars is another example. But campus, actually the first campus anywhere in the world was created in London. That was not even 2 years ago, a year and a half ago. Not even a year and a half ago. Then in January, we launched Campus Tel Aviv as a physical environment to help entrepreneurs in Israel. We're also having activities in Poland, which is a smaller version of campus. We don't call it campus. And we work with partners in Berlin and in Paris. So in Paris, it's Silicon Sentier. And in Berlin, we're working with a partner called The Factory, which will provide a campus-like environment operated by them with help of Googlers, etc. So I think it's a question of when. And I hope that we'll see more campuses, but I think that there's a lot that Google does to help local startup communities, even if it doesn't mean a 7-story building filled with about your question,
Google campus in London, but all around the world you have what's called co-working spaces. I consider Google part of this. You have over 2,500 everywhere. Factory is one of them in Berlin, so you can go somewhere else while they make their job.
I think it's a good point. You know, there's lots of people doing great things out there. You don't have to call it a campus to innovate or to join your community. I would just like to mention just the differentiation that campus isn't just an operating space, co-working space. Co-working space is part of what we do, but you're right that when it comes to physical space, there's plenty of towns, cities, etc., and they're popping up like a mushroom after the rain, where you can go and join a community instead of working from your dorm room. Questions? Yeah, there's one over there, and one over here.
Hello.
Hello.
You are so happy about the 20% time, but why did Google announce to stop the program some weeks ago?
I think when you read the news, it's very easy to make up your mind about something and think like, oh, this is the definitive truth. And the truth is that 20% didn't stop. And I'm working at the moment with 20%ers that are working with the permission of their manager. And it's actually an amazing thing. But it has to be done with focus. You know, if everyone, 20% time, when you look at it on face value, it's a day a week, right? We work 5 days a week. Each day is 20%. So 20% time, in its true meaning, it's a day a week. So if the entire company spent a day a week working on whatever they're passionate about, it would be very hard to run the company. But when it's focused, approved, concise, and measurable, it actually happens and it brings amazing results. There's one over here and one over here.
Hi, thanks very much for the talk. So you explained the 8 principles of innovation. What would you say is the most important out of the 8?
Good question. I think that they're all important. It's hard to choose one, but if I have to say where is the most important one, is never fail to fail. Because failure can be paralyzing. And people, how many of you have ideas or a notebook when you put your ideas and you say like, oh, I have a brilliant idea? Almost all of you. Why haven't you done it? The world needs your help. You know, these are problems that need to be solved. Every industry is going to be revolutionized because of technology, because of startups. But it's this fear of failure that sometimes paralyzes us. So if you could adopt one, I would say that would be it. And if I could say one that I haven't mentioned that I think is very important, it's finding product market fit. A lot of the startups obsess with the product. They say, I want to have a beautiful product. I want to have a technologically advanced product. I want to have patents. But they don't focus on this elusive element that's product market fit. You need to build a product that your users want, not the product that you think that they want. So finding this product market fit is when the magic happens. It's creating the solution that your users are asking for and developing based on their feedback and their usage and not necessarily based on a hunch. Yeah, there was one over here.
Yes, it's me.
Okay.
I would like to ask you how many...
Where are you?
Here.
Oh, there we go.
So I want to ask you how long it takes you create your Google Glass and how many people help you?
How
many people and how long it takes?
How many people and how long it takes to create Google Glass?
Yes.
Good question. I'm not sure. I'm not in the Google X team. Okay, he knows. Next speaker will tell you how many people and how long it took. He is also wearing glass. We should take a picture together, because I don't think that there's too many other glass units in the UK. There's 2 in Europe. They're right here. If a bomb falls on Europe, there's no glass in Europe anymore. There's one more question over here, and I think that would be the last one. Make it matter.
Hi, thanks
Hi.
very much for coming to this event and to talking to us. I wanted to elaborate more on your approach on talking to a user and shaping your product. Did you follow the same mentality when building Google Campus?
Absolutely. Great question, and I think it's a great note to finish on because it's a very important topic that people don't talk about enough. So it's called customer development. The book, the Bible on this, was written by Steve Blank. I highly recommend, again, go to your local library and take out the 4 steps to the epiphany. Customer development essentially says you have to talk to your customers to develop your market even before you launch the product. So for me, when I was starting Campus, it's a very personal story, but I'll tell you what I did. Essentially, I was doing a different role at Google. I was doing strategic partnerships in Europe, launched Google Shopping in Spain, local shopping in the UK. But my passion was always startups. My labor of love is a blog called VC Cafe, where I started 8 years ago, where I wrote about startups and venture capital. And every day I used to come back home and search in the intranet of Google for startups, venture capital, what's going on in Europe, what's going on in the UK. One day I found out that there's this idea from Eric Schmidt called Campus, and I realized that it was in very nascent stages, so I emailed the person that was written on this page, and I said, like, hey, I just found out about this, can I help? And she said, well, in a few months, we'll be looking for a head for it. That's all the hint that I needed, and I said, absolutely, count me in. And then I went and I spoke to something like 45 people, startups, accelerators, VCs. I couldn't tell them exactly the detail of what's going on, but I said, like, hey, if there was this thing going on, and let's call it a building, and Google was behind it, and I was in charge of it, what do you think my priorities should be? Or what do you think the priorities of this person should be? What are the big problems of startups in the UK? What's missing? Or I would ask the startup, when you go to events, which ones give you the most value? What do you wish you had 3 months ago when you started? And I collected all this information, and I created my first 100 days plan. This is before anyone offered me the job. But I was genuinely passionate about it, so I didn't have to. Like, it wasn't work for me. I was taking like breakfast, lunch meetings, evening meetings, coffees. And then I created this document, and when the time came for the interviews, they asked me, so what would you do as the head of Campus? And I said, well, let me show you. It's called the briefcase technique. You open your briefcase and you hand them the document. And of course, I didn't leave them much choice, but it's the same principle applies, right? You have to talk to customers to understand what they need if you want to be able to find this product market fit. Thank you very much. Cheers.
Thank you very much, Easy. Very, very inspirational. Thank you.